The new space race, why the moon is about to become a battlefield. The calm before the lunar storm. 50 years ago, the moon symbolized peace, a silent witness to humanity's first small step. But tonight, another glint flashes across its surface, and this one isn't about discovery. A US satellite orbiting quietly above the moon's south pole detects unexpected motion near a crater. Analysts call it static at first, just sunlight on dust. Then the outline sharpens, metallic, deliberate, engineered, something someone is building. Within minutes, encrypted channels lit up across continents. Washington, Beijing, Moscow. The age of exploration was colliding with something far older: competition, fear, control. What should have been humanity's shared frontier was starting to fracture. For decades, the moon had been the symbol of peace in the void. Tonight, that illusion cracked. What if the next great conflict doesn't start on Earth, but above it? Because control of the moon isn't just about science anymore, it's about power, dominance, and the future of civilization itself. Everything changed the moment we decided to stay there. The dream of a peaceful frontier. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon in 1969, half the planet held its breath. In that moment, it was America planting a flag, it was humanity touching the stars. People believed space would be different, bigger, cleaner, immune to the greed and rivalry that scar Earth. For a time, that belief shaped everything. In 1967, even before Apollo, almost every major nation had signed the Outer Space Treaty. It promised that no one could claim the moon or any celestial body by sovereignty, occupation, or any other means. The heavens, it said, would belong to everyone. The treaty was idealistic, almost poetic, a declaration that space would never become a battlefield. It spoke of peaceful purposes and the benefit of all humankind. Those words echoed through classrooms and control rooms alike. They built the mythology of a shared cosmic destiny. But history has a way of testing myths. In the decades that followed, attention faded. The moon was conquered, at least symbolically. Nations turned inward: wars, economies, politics. The stars grew silent again, then new voices began to rise. Entrepreneurs, engineers, and governments started looking back up, not for glory but for opportunity. By the 202s, a second space age had quietly begun. Only this time, dreams of scientific harmony shared the stage with strategy and profit. NASA's Artemis program revived ambitions to return humans to the lunar surface, not just to visit but to stay. The goal, a permanent presence. Bases, rovers, infrastructure, humanity would build off-world. Artemis wasn't alone. China's Chang program advanced with remarkable precision, landing probes, deploying rovers, mapping regions rich in ice and metals. Russia pursued cooperation, seeking to revive its Cold War-era expertise and relevance through joint projects. Behind these plans pulsed one idea: whoever builds first defines the rules. That's where the dream began to shift. The moon stopped being neutral ground and started looking like real estate. In press briefings, leaders spoke of scientific discovery. But in private, analysts saw something else: a scramble for influence that could reshape Earth's balance of power. See, the moon isn't just a dot of light in the sky. It's a vault, a storehouse of resources, and a strategic platform looking down on Earth. The country that controls the supply lines, communication hubs, or refueling stations there would hold an unprecedented kind of leverage, both economic and military. That's what's really at stake when we talk about exploration. The next superpower might not be measured by naval fleets or oil reserves, but by who commands the launch pads and power grids at the lunar poles. Still, the old ideals die hard. NASA's official language remains deeply cooperative. Artemis invites partners, the European Space Agency, Japan, Canada, to join under the banner of peaceful exploration. They built the Artemis Accords as a modern code of conduct, promising transparency and shared responsibility. But not everyone signed. China and Russia rejected the accords, calling them thinly veiled attempts at American dominance. Instead, they developed their own blueprint, the International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS. Publicly, it's a scientific initiative. Privately, it's a statement: we'll build our own future on our own terms. So now two rival visions orbit the same goal, one led by Washington, another by Beijing and Moscow. Each promises peace. Each is backed by billions of dollars in technology, rockets, and ambition. This is where hope collides with geopolitics, because the moon isn't infinite, it has choke points. Sunlit plateaus near the poles promise solar dominance, craters shadowed so deeply they trap ancient ice, the key to fuel and survival. Those resources define strategy. For Washington, the goal is deterrence through presence, maintaining the ultimate high ground to keep the peace via control. For Beijing, it's strategic denial, ensuring no single power monopolizes that ground. Moscow, though smaller in scale, seeks endurance and leverage through alliance. Each block builds under the same sky, each claiming security as justification. Whoever secures those sites first gains not just real estate, but advantage measured in deterrence and denial. And that's the unspoken truth behind the rhetoric of cooperation. Even peaceful intentions become competitive when scarcity enters the picture. So what started as humanity's grand rebirth in space has quietly evolved into something far more familiar. Contracts, territorial positioning, resource assessments, surveillance satellites. The surface that once symbolized unity now carries the seeds of rivalry. Inside NASA's mission control, maps of the lunar surface mark target sites in shades of blue and red. In Beijing's Deep Space Command, plans unfold for independent navigation networks, an alternative to GPS that ensures Chinese missions never rely on American data. In Moscow, engineers dream of regaining lost prestige by contributing nuclear power systems for long-duration lunar stations. Everyone claims they're building for humanity, but who decides what humanity needs? The question of ownership, the one diplomats thought settled back in 1967, is rising again. Because no law prevents exclusive access to resources. The treaties forbid sovereignty, yes, but say nothing about private or corporate operations under national banners. So when a company mines lunar ice with a NASA contract, or when a Chinese rover surveys a crater whose flag really flies there, the country S, the company S, or no one's at all. That's the ambiguity opening the door to conflict. Every landing site becomes a foothold. Every communications array becomes potential leverage. The dream of a peaceful frontier isn't dead, but it's fractured. What's emerging is a new reality: cooperation on paper, competition in orbit, a slow drift from unity toward quiet suspicion. And somewhere, floating hundreds of thousands of miles away, the moon waits, not as a symbol of peace this time, but as the next mirror reflecting who we really are. Because maybe the question isn't whether we can live together on another world, it's whether we ever learn to share this one. And as the new millennium's rockets ignite, one truth is already clear: the frontier may be vast, but humanity's ambitions are even bigger. Rise of the new contenders. The silence didn't last long. Once the United States reignited lunar ambition through the Artemis program, other powers saw the writing on the wall. Space wasn't going to wait. Whoever mastered the moon first wouldn't just build a base, they'd set the rules for everyone else. In Beijing, a different kind of countdown began. The Chinese lunar exploration program, better known as Chang, had been progressing methodically for nearly 2 decades. By the mid-2002s, it wasn't just a series of robotic tests. It had become the spine of a long-term national strategy, an effort to establish a permanent, independent Chinese presence on the moon. Each mission built on the last. Chang 4 back in 2019 had landed on the far side of the moon, the first in human history, and deployed a rover named Yudu 2. It kept driving years beyond its expected lifespan, quietly mapping terrain and testing communications through a relay satellite. To most observers, it looked like routine exploration. But under that surface, it was data collection, engineering reconnaissance for something bigger coming down the line. Inside China's National Space Administration headquarters, planners were already studying resource potential at the lunar South Pole. They focused on craters like Shackleton and Malapert, known for near-constant sunlight and the potential presence of frozen water. Those weren't just scientific targets, they were strategic ones. By 2003, Chinese astronauts, taikonauts, were scheduled to walk on the moon. Their base, part of the International Lunar Research Station, would be powered by modular nuclear generators, supplied by heavy-lift rockets launching from the new Wenchang spaceport on Hainan Island. Beijing portrayed it as a cooperative project, open to friendly nations. But the fine print revealed something else. The data, infrastructure, and command systems would be controlled solely through China's national framework. In Washington, that changed the tone overnight. For the first time since the Cold War, American analysts started referencing lunar power projection. A new term entered defense briefings: Cislunar deterrence. Russia, meanwhile, refused to fade into the background. Although its space program had stumbled in the 200s, budget cuts, corruption scandals, failed launches, it remained an old master of spacecraft engineering. And for Moscow, partnership became survival. When Western sanctions squeezed its aerospace industries, Moscow turned toward Beijing, offering to merge decades of expertise with China's budget and industrial capacity. Their collaboration evolved into a pragmatic alliance. Officially, it was scientific exchange: robotic landers, sample return missions, lunar infrastructure blueprints. Unofficially, it deepened the divide between the Artemis coalition and the Eurasian bloc forming around the ILRS. There was irony here. The Soviet Union once raced the US to the moon. Now modern Russia sought its redemption not by winning the race but by clinging to someone else's rocket. For Moscow, success wasn't planting a flag, it was ensuring it wasn't left behind on Earth. Still, Russian engineers brought unique strengths. Their designs for long-duration nuclear surface reactors, developed from submarine and Arctic power systems, were essential for operating through the lunar night. And their history of crewed capsule reliability offered something even NASA quietly respected. Then came the gray zone, the space between open cooperation and covert competition. As the US announced new Artemis milestones, China accelerated its own. Each press release seemed like a response. When NASA revealed the Gateway lunar station design, Beijing unveiled plans for a modular facility at a similar orbit. When the US tested advanced lunar communications, China launched its Kuekiao-2 relay satellites capable of monitoring vast regions of cislunar space. Every move had a mirror, every success sparked a counter. In public, diplomats smiled at international conferences, saying there was room for everyone. Behind closed doors, military strategists updated contingency tables. They calculated signal coverage, supply routes, and the effective ranges of rockets that could one day control them. But there was another, quieter threat forming: the rise of private power. SpaceX, already dominating global launch markets, began testing its giant Starship system specifically for lunar operations. Blue Origin pushed its Blue Moon lander program into high gear. These companies weren't bound by the pace of diplomacy. They moved fast, iterating even faster, funded by a mix of federal contracts and private capital. China's scientists noticed. What made the new era dangerous wasn't merely national rivalry, it was speed. The United States no longer operated like a monolithic bureaucracy. It had outsourced momentum to private giants that could outbuild entire nations. Starship could transport 100 tons of cargo per flight. For comparison, the Saturn V carried just over 48. It wasn't only powerful, it was reusable, cost-efficient, and privately owned. That changed more than economics, it changed geopolitics. If a single corporation could deliver infrastructure, deploy rovers, build habitats, and even establish power grids for profit, where did state authority end? Governments found themselves dependent on companies to maintain presence in orbit. The lines between technological dominance and national security blurred until they were nearly identical. In China, state enterprises like CASC and private offshoots like iSpace began mimicking that hybrid model: commercial units technically independent but strategically controlled. Russia fostered smaller startup collaborations to stay relevant, while still relying heavily on state oversight. What emerged by the late 200s wasn't a race between nations, but between systems. On one side, a Western ecosystem balancing government funding and corporate agility. On the other, a state-directed machine merging national objectives with central authority. Each side measured success not just in missions completed, but in capabilities denied to the other. To the public, space exploration still carried language of peace, scientific collaboration, sustainable living, humanity's future. But the core message had shifted. When analysts described permanent presence, what they really meant was permanent influence. By 2028, the number of planned or announced lunar missions had quadrupled. Landing zones were plotted like chessboards, NASA aiming for the South Polar Rim, China for adjacent craters, India planning hops between. Each new satellite navigation system, GPS, Beidou, GLONASS, was enhanced to cover not just cislunar trajectories but the far side of the moon itself. And as tracking networks expanded, so did surveillance concerns. Who controlled the data pipelines? Who could see whose landers, whose resource drills, whose relays? Every nation started developing autonomous data encryption for lunar communications, ostensibly for mission safety, practically for information control. Even allies watched each other warily. Japan and the European Space Agency, partners in Artemis, negotiated data sharing clauses to protect proprietary research from American corporate contractors. Trust, the most fragile fuel of exploration, started to thin. Meanwhile, Russia hinted at reviving its Luna 27 lander with European-built sensors replaced by domestic ones, proof it could operate without Western help. And China prepared its Chang'e 8 mission, an experimental step toward in situ construction, testing 3D printing with lunar regolith. Publicly science, privately sovereignty. The moon had become the ultimate proving ground. Each success story, each rover, lander, or sample meant more than exploration. It was a signal: we can do this on our own. By the decade's close, the scorecard looked less like scientific collaboration and more like the prelude to partition. The US and its partners controlled most planned launch schedules. China's fleet was rapidly catching up. Russia remained the technical wildcard. And orbiting above everything, the satellites of private corporations formed the nervous system connecting it all. From a distance, it still resembled progress. Machines whirring, humans reaching, banners celebrating a new age of discovery. But beneath the optimism simmered something older, sharper, unmistakably human, competition dressed as cooperation. This wasn't the second space race. It was something harder to define, an era where diplomacy, commerce, and national pride all collided hundreds of thousands of miles away. And somewhere out there, amid the silence and the dust, the moon was becoming divided, one mission at a time. The corporate space frontier. By the late 202s, the frontier didn't belong only to nations anymore. The logos on the rockets told the story: blue feathers, mission patches with dragons, stylized X symbols instead of flags. The space race had gone corporate, and it moved faster than governments could legislate. Private powers now operated as extensions of national will. SpaceX's Starship wasn't just a rocket, it was a strategic asset, capable of projecting influence and supplying outposts 500,000 kilometers away. Blue Origin's lander teams branded commerce as exploration, while policymakers quietly called them dual-use infrastructure. In this era, every launch served science on paper and sovereignty in practice. SpaceX led the charge, turning what once seemed impossible into an assembly line of launches. Its Starship program wasn't just a rocket, it was an infrastructure system. With a single vehicle capable of carrying over 100 tons to low Earth orbit, Starship turned the moon into a reachable destination for routine freight. What once took years of planning and billions in public funding could now be scheduled like international shipping. But SpaceX wasn't alone. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' space company, was developing Blue Moon, a lander designed to transport cargo and eventually crew to the lunar surface. Their public goal was creating a sustained human presence, but internally the emphasis lingered on logistics and energy. Establishing reliable supply routes meant controlling the gates of expansion, and whoever ran those gates would shape lunar economics. NASA, recognizing this new ecosystem, shifted its entire strategy. Instead of owning missions outright, it became a customer. Through the Commercial Lunar Payload Services (CLPS) program, NASA began outsourcing lander development, surface operations, and infrastructure support to private companies. They paid per kilogram of delivery, turning lunar access into a competitive market rather than a state monopoly. That decision changed everything. The rhythm of exploration sped up. Firefly Aerospace, Astrobotic, and Intuitive machines joined the race, promising cargo shipments, rover deliveries, even miniature power stations, each one under contract, insured, and scheduled like freight carriers. Space was no longer a distant dream, it was becoming a business network. At Astrobotic's headquarters in Pittsburgh, engineers weren't talking about astronauts, they were discussing LunaGrid, a commercial lunar power grid designed to provide continuous electricity through the long lunar night. It wasn't science fiction. Solar nodes would link across the surface, transmitting energy by microwaves. Eventually, they could sell power the same way Earth utilities do, by the kilowatt hour. This industrialization marked a profound shift in philosophy. Space exploration had always been heroic, a national endeavor powered by unity and sacrifice. But now, every bolt tightened on a lander, every contract signed for data transfer, every kilogram of payload delivered was measured in profit margins and private equity return. Governments embraced it because it worked. SpaceX could land boosters for a fraction of NASA's historical cost. Blue Origin could build reusable systems without the political constraints of congressional funding cycles. Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos presented it as vision, humanity's inevitable expansion into the cosmos. But to policymakers, it was convenient economics. Still, no one ignored the implications. When private companies own the vehicles, stations, and communication relays, who governs them? When they chart routes across the lunar surface, who regulates airspace, or rather, vacuum space? The Outer Space Treaty never predicted a time when corporations would act like de facto nations. Space lawyers scrambled to interpret old language in new ways. The treaty forbade national appropriation, but said little about commercial operations. So technically, if a private contractor starts mining water ice at the lunar South Pole under a US license, that activity exists in a gray zone, entirely legal for now, entirely strategic later. This ambiguity wasn't an accident. Governments understood that plausible deniability could become a geopolitical asset. A private firm can do what a state cannot, at least officially. It can establish presence, test technology, even monopolize resource sites without triggering an international incident. That's why opponents paid attention. China and Russia both studied the US commercial model closely. Beijing encouraged state-backed private companies to mimic SpaceX's agility, blurring the same lines in reverse: corporate freedom under government direction. Russia, short on funding, turned to joint ventures, offering launch services and reactor technology in exchange for partnerships that would keep its presence visible. Competition didn't stop at who could land first. It extended to data, communication, and navigation. As SpaceX built its Starlink satellite constellation for global internet service, analysts noted its quieter purpose: potential lunar communications coverage. If deployed beyond Earth orbit, Starlink-derived networks could provide private, encrypted coordination to American missions long before any international equivalent existed. Meanwhile, Blue Origin courted NASA and the European Space Agency with the promise of sustainable lunar transport, arguing that commercial independence was the key to permanent presence. And Astrobotics robotic landers began stacking missions on the manifest: scientific instruments one year, industrial payloads the next. The result was an ecosystem that looked like innovation heaven and political chaos all at once. In boardrooms, executives talked about lunar industrial economics. They modeled the moon as a supply chain: launch from Earth, refuel in orbit, land at polar base, mine local ice, convert it into fuel, and repeat. Each step yielded profit loops extending from government contracts to commercial refueling depots. But defending those assets meant something new. Insurance policies started accounting for damage not from accidents but from interference. Companies began integrating basic security protocols into their hardware: autonomous fault detection, frequency hopping communications, hardened circuits. On paper, it was just reliability engineering. In practice, it was militarization under another name. Every innovation added another layer of power. When Firefly's Blue Ghost lander succeeded in its first mission, collecting over 100 gigabytes of data, it proved that small companies could operate on par with entire national programs. Investors noticed. Money poured in from tech conglomerates, energy firms, and even defense contractors seeking early stakes in the off-world economy. That was the quiet revolution. The same forces that once drove software, oil, and telecommunications were shifting their gaze upward. Space became the next industrial platform, and the moon the ultimate offshore branch. But money never moves alone. Influence follows. The greater the financial stake, the louder the demand for protection, preferably state-backed. And this is where things began to twist. Every corporate success strengthened a national hand. SpaceX's breakthroughs elevated American strategic confidence. Blue Origin's contracts expanded NASA's network of influence. Conversely, China's state-partnered firms like CASC delivered dual-use technologies that blended exploration with strategic autonomy. Soon, what looked like corporate competition started resembling proxy rivalry. Factories designing lunar excavation tools tested prototypes that might one day become resource defense systems. Communications relays doubled as surveillance nodes. Even terrain mapping rovers quietly built intelligence databases for engineering and possibly targeting purposes. Within this framework, the question wasn't if the moon would be commercialized, but how fast it would become political. To the public, it still felt like progress, companies democratizing space travel, making exploration efficient and accessible. But buried in corporate filings were clauses about territorial exclusivity, data ownership, and priority passage, terms that on Earth define jurisdiction. In space, they define future conflict zones. NASA's presence through contracts and oversight provided a layer of legitimacy, but that didn't erase the underlying tension. As each private launch reached orbit, it extended the reach of national policy by proxy. American rockets meant American influence. Chinese infrastructure meant Chinese jurisdiction, at least in practice. Even small events hinted at the fragile balance. A delayed payload delivery could stall another nation's experiment. A failed communication relay might disrupt months of coordinated data. Every orbital node mattered because it connected a domino line of dependence stretching back to Earth. By the end of the decade, the once clear separation between public exploration and private enterprise had vanished. Mission press releases read like joint venture announcements. Lunar Base Alpha developed by NASA, operated by SpaceX, powered by Astrobotic systems. Cooperation, yes, but also ownership, partnership, and proprietary control. And with those words, ownership, partnership, came stakes far higher than science. Because when one company's habitat becomes another nation's lifeline, what happens if relations sour? Who holds the switch that powers the outpost or cuts it off? That's the paradox of the corporate frontier. It promises independence while creating new networks of dependence. Behind every sleek promotional video showing humanity's next step, there lurks a quieter calculus about supply chains, jurisdiction, and loyalty. In the end, the corporations reshaping exploration aren't just building rockets or bases. They're constructing the framework for sovereignty itself, one module, one satellite, one contract at a time. And as those contracts multiply, one realization becomes impossible to ignore. With infrastructure comes vulnerability. Someone will have to protect it. Because in space, assets don't stay neutral for long. When you build power stations 40 million kilometers from home, power of every kind must follow. And once there's something to defend, defense stops being a choice. It becomes policy. The moon's untapped wealths. At first glance, the moon looks barren, a dead world carved from gray dust and silence. But beneath that surface lies something extraordinary, a treasure chest of resources unlike anything on Earth. For decades, scientists believed it was lifeless rock. Now, data from orbiters and landers tell a different story. The moon hides water, metals, and even elements that could power future civilizations. And whoever extracts them first may hold the keys to the next global economy. At the heart of it all is water ice. It sounds simple, but in space, water is currency. Along the moon's poles, deep in crater shadows untouched by sunlight for billions of years, blocks of frozen water sit buried under layers of dust. The discovery was confirmed over a decade ago, and every mission since has refined the maps, showing deposits stretching for hundreds of meters. With that resource, a lunar settlement becomes possible. Melt it and you get drinking water. Split it and you produce hydrogen and oxygen rocket fuel. That's why those shadowed craters have become the most valuable real estate in space. Whoever controls the supply of water controls access to oxygen, to fuel, to life itself. In the 21st century, the rush for offshore oil reshaped global power. In the 22nd, lunar ice could do the same. But ice isn't the only prize. Lunar regolith, the fine dust blanketing the moon, is riddled with metals. Aluminum, titanium, and iron exist in higher concentrations than on most asteroids. The European Space Agency's tests have already shown that with enough heat, these metals can be smelted into pure material for construction. Combine that with 3D printing and the moon turns into its own supply chain. No need to launch steel and concrete from Earth. You just print what you need, block by block, using the soil beneath your boots. It's engineering alchemy, transforming dust into infrastructure. NASA calls this in situ resource utilization, or ISRU, and by the 203s it's the backbone of every permanent base plan. The technology has already advanced enough to extract oxygen directly from lunar rock by electrolysis, producing breathable air and rocket oxidizer without a single resupply launch. Then there's helium-3, the most speculative and seductive of them all, a rare isotope embedded in the upper layers of lunar regolith. On Earth, helium-3 is virtually non-existent. On the moon, it's scattered everywhere, deposited over eons by solar wind. If controlled nuclear fusion ever becomes viable, helium-3 could serve as an ideal, clean fuel, no dangerous waste, immense energy potential. The catch is that no one has yet built a practical fusion reactor that can use it. Still, the promise is enough to lure investors, engineers, and dreamers alike. China, in particular, has never hidden its interest in helium-3. The term appeared in its early lunar mission statements and re-emerged as a subtle constant in Chang mission transcripts. Beijing's research institutes have modeled helium-3 extraction as a potential strategic national asset. While Western agencies downplay the timeline, no one dismisses the ambition. Meanwhile, commercial startups on Earth have turned theoretical charts into mechanical prototypes. Israeli firm Helios has built electrolysis reactors capable of releasing oxygen and metals from simulated regolith using sunlight as power. American consortium Enerlun is experimenting with microwave mining to vaporize ice without crews nearby. And nearly every private lunar venture has quietly filed for intellectual property rights on extraction and refining methods. Here's where the competition sharpens. The moon isn't like an open ocean, it's a patchwork of environments that vary dramatically. Only certain areas, the polar rims, the permanently shadowed valleys, the regions rich in certain oxides, are truly usable for sustained operations. Those zones are limited, and every nation is surveying them like miners marking claims on an ungoverned frontier. Publicly, the missions are scientific, testing power systems, evaluating soil composition. Privately, each probe's dataset is potential leverage for future access. Resource maps are being compiled but not widely shared. The information is selectively classified, parceled out through secure channels, traded as strategic assets. Data has become the new flag planted in the dust. Then there's the issue of energy. Sustaining life and industry on the moon requires constant power through a 14-day night, 14 Earth days of darkness and sub-zero cold. Solar alone won't cut it. That's why NASA's plan for a 100-kilowatt nuclear reactor by 203 is so critical. The unit would provide continuous energy for mining, construction, and habitation. The design draws from submarine systems, combining compact shielding and automated control. Russia once specialized in this technology, and remnants of that expertise now circulate through international partnerships. China, too, is racing to field mobile nuclear systems for its planned outpost. Some of these reactors are dual-use. They can heat habitats, power refineries, or defend installations with high-energy microwave beams if adapted for security. Even renewable research carries military undertones when survival itself becomes strategic. And that raises a deeper problem, the convergence of economics and defense. You can't separate them in space. When a company invests billions in infrastructure 500,000 kilometers away, it demands protection, oversight, guarantees. That's when governments step back in, claiming security as rationale for a permanent military presence. It's a subtle metamorphosis, commerce justified by science guarded by the military. On paper, everything stays peaceful. In practice, the gear being shipped to the moon, modular drills, power deployers, communication hubs, could double as surveillance arrays or weapon mounts. The line between mining rig and defense platform grows thin in the vacuum. Look closer at the corporate language. Asset security, surface resilience, contingency operations. These are terms borrowed straight from defense contracts. The moon miners of 203 might not carry rifles, but their robots will have failsafes capable of denial operations, blocking access to tunnels, cutting power, even self-sealing facilities. And yet the temptations keep growing. Economists project a 100 billion lunar economy before 2035, driven by private mining and state-backed infrastructure. Each ton of extracted oxygen or metal reduces Earth launch costs and multiplies the edge of whoever harnesses it. A kilogram of lunar-derived propellant manufactured in situ could save thousands on Earth's surface. Multiply that across thousands of launches, and the result isn't just profit, it's supremacy in off-world logistics. Europe sees the same horizon. The European Space Agency's prototype refinery aims to demonstrate end-to-end oxygen extraction by the end of this decade, integrated into Artemis missions. Japan eyes automated rovers that handle excavation based on AI decision loops. Even India and the UAE have joined, plotting robotic prospectors for polar terrain. Every participant insists their goals are peaceful, sustainable, collaborative. Nobody mentions that the resource flow they unlock could alter terrestrial trade balances overnight. Imagine it, a nation capable of producing fuel and metal beyond Earth's gravity well instantly gains cheaper access to Mars, asteroids, and deep space missions. That's not just a scientific advantage, it's a geopolitical earthquake. The infrastructure built around mining becomes the backbone of everything else: transport, communications, construction, even defense. The moon effectively turns into the first off-world industrial zone, self-sustaining and strategically decisive. But with every blueprint published, competitors adjust their trajectories. Surveillance satellites watch each other's rovers across the desolate plains. Algorithms calculate which crater promises the best yield. All this unfolds in a legal fog because no internationally binding framework defines ownership or protection rights. So mining rights blur into territorial suggestion. A corporate frontier post becomes a national proxy. Tranquil lunar valleys become the next gold rush towns, without law, without judges, only silent machines carving value from dust. And that's the hidden story behind the glossy press releases and the Instagram-ready astronaut selfies. The quest for lunar resources isn't just about fueling rockets or building bases. It's about building power itself, economic, political, and potentially military. It's a slow, metallic heartbeat beneath the moon's quiet surface, pulsing with the same rhythm that's driven every empire since time began. Because once you dig into that soil, you're no longer exploring, you're claiming. And someone somewhere will come to protect that claim. Defending the lunar frontier. By the time the first permanent habitats take shape, something subtle but irreversible has begun. The moon, once an open experiment in cooperation, now demands protection. Every antenna, every storage vault, every reactor module on the surface costs billions, and anything that expensive becomes a target even 380,000 kilometers away. So nations start to whisper the same question: how do you defend a base in a place where there's no air, no sound, and nowhere to hide? Defense on the moon doesn't look like tanks or soldiers. It's geometry, engineering, and pressure. The greatest enemy isn't invasion, it's exposure. A single crack in a habitat's shell could kill everyone inside before any alarm finishes sounding. That reality turns every lunar engineer into a tactician and every architect into a strategist. The first rule is bury deep or die fast. Underground bases aren't just practical, they're life-saving. Beneath several meters of lunar regolith, radiation drops, temperatures stabilize, and micrometeorites can't puncture walls. The same design that protects against nature also protects against attack. On Earth, you build fortresses by raising walls. On the moon, you build them by vanishing into dust. NASA's analysts studied old military engineering even before the first Artemis modules launched. They found the moon's curvature offers direct line of sight for hundreds of kilometers. That means any surface installation is visible and vulnerable from far away. Long-range observation satellites can lock targets with eerie precision. A directed energy beam or kinetic strike wouldn't need to breach defenses. It would only need to crack the seal. So the logic of concealment rules everything. Bases are tucked behind crater walls or dug beneath. Camouflage becomes digital rather than visual, heat signatures masked, reflectivity altered to blend with thermal backgrounds. Some proposed outposts employ rotating mirrors that mimic shifting shadow to fool distant sensors. In simulation labs, technicians run mock assaults using computer-guided drones. They learn that aggression doesn't last long in vacuum. Traditional projectiles behave unpredictably, recoil throws machines backward, dust clouds from impacts linger for hours. Even so, the possibilities remain too real to ignore. Engineers test pressurized rover patrols equipped with surveillance packages, capable of circling a base with cameras and radar sweep. If anything approaches, the system reacts faster than human reflex can travel across the 1.5-second communication delay from Earth. Automation isn't optional, it's survival. AI-driven defense software monitors horizon arcs for movement, tracks orbital debris, and categorizes threats. The same algorithms designed for collision avoidance in orbital traffic doubles as intrusion detection on the ground. But autonomy introduces danger. Once an automated sentry decides something is a threat, intervention from Earth might arrive too late to override it. In the fragile ecosystem of a lunar outpost, a false alarm could mean a destroyed habitat, or worse, a diplomatic crisis. That tightrope defines 21st century lunar strategy. Build defenses strong enough to survive, but restrained enough not to start a war by accident. The next strategy focuses on distribution. Instead of one grand base, planners sketch networks of interconnected modules separated by kilometers. Power arrays, communication nodes, and life support units operate semi-independently. If one site fails or is targeted, the others keep functioning. It's resilience through fragmentation. NASA calls it redundant habitation. The military reads that as compartmentalized defense. Different vocabulary, same intent. Deny anyone a single catastrophic point of failure. Technology fills the gaps. 3D printing, already crucial for construction, becomes defensive infrastructure. Damaged panels can be replaced within hours using regolith-based feedstock. In emergency drills, automated printers patch micrometeor impacts without waiting for crew input. The same process could, theoretically, rebuild a wall after an intentional hit. The moon becomes self-repairing. Then there's the question of surveillance. On Earth, radars scan skies. On the moon, sensors must watch both above and below the horizon, linking to orbital constellations in cislunar space. Data from those networks flows into command centers, sometimes in Houston, sometimes in Beijing, sometimes at shared hubs. They call it space domain awareness, but beneath that neutral phrase sits a clear motive: know what everyone else is doing every second. Even cooperation hides competition. When the Artemis Coalition shares lunar telemetry with partners, classified streams travel separately through encrypted channels. The ILRS alliance does the same. Every antenna multiplies both coordination and suspicion, because if you can see a rival's base, you can map its weaknesses. Meanwhile, new materials promise passive defense. Research into self-healing composites produces glass capable of sealing microfractures automatically, originally for micrometeorite protection, soon marketed as impact adaptive. Chinese institutes pair these with dust-repellent coatings to shield solar panels from obscuring regolith storms. The result, structures that can take small hits and keep working. It sounds futuristic, but prototypes already exist in vacuum test chambers. Even so, every protection breeds escalation. If one side can seal a breach faster, the other experiments with more powerful penetrators or electronic interference. For each advance in shielding, there's an equal investment in recognition and override. The quiet arms race spreads not through weapons stockpiles, but through engineering upgrades disguised as maintenance. The ethics get murky fast. Officials insist these systems are purely defensive, yet they mirror offensive architecture. A laser designed to vaporize floating debris could easily blind a rival's probe. A rover meant to secure a perimeter could disable another nation's communications array if reprogrammed. In lunar politics, intent matters less than capability, and everyone knows it. Space lawyers struggle to keep up. The Outer Space Treaty bans weapons of mass destruction in orbit, but never defined defensive emplacements on extraterrestrial surfaces. A turret that fires sand pellets at high velocity might qualify as industrial equipment one day and armament the next. The distinction becomes semantic until someone tests it. Publicly, planners frame the conversation in softer terms: habitat sustainability, mission safety, infrastructure protection. It sounds peaceful because it must. But privately, policy papers use colder language: deterrence, denial, survivability. Different euphemisms for the same ancient instinct: guard what's yours. By 2035, both major blocs, Artemis and ILRS, treat defense as a design principle, not an afterthought. Chinese planners envision modular fortifications made from sintered regolith bricks, 6 meters thick, surrounding key installations. US blueprints outline inflatable domes covered with reactive foam that hardens on damage. Russian proposals involve radiothermal barriers that can redirect energy bursts into surrounding soil. Each idea blurs science fiction and strategy. And yet, for all the talk of security, none of these defenses change the moon's fundamental vulnerability. There's no police, no standing army, no rescue force beyond radio range. The smallest malfunction, a punctured cable, a misfired drone, could spiral into catastrophe. Power loss means suffocation, signal loss means isolation. The irony is brutal. To protect life on the moon, humanity builds systems that might one day threaten it. The very act of defense expands the footprint of militarization. What begins as a safety layer becomes a perimeter, a border, a claim, and claims demand recognition. In meeting rooms back on Earth, diplomats debate safety zones, regions around each base where others agree not to intrude. On paper, it's about avoiding accidents. In practice, it's sovereignty by stealth. Step into another nation's safety zone without permission and you risk diplomatic fire. No shots fired, just crossed lines. Privately, some experts propose the obvious, an international lunar peacekeeping framework. But enforcement would require presence, and presence looks exactly like occupation. No one wants to be the first to legitimize armed deployment outside Earth, yet no one's comfortable being defenseless either. And this is where morality collapses into necessity. Outposts can't rely on goodwill when a lost drone or misinterpreted sensor echo could be mistaken for sabotage. So commanders design systems that balance deterrence and restraint, non-lethal countermeasures like high-intensity lights, heat dispersers, signal jammers, tools meant to warn, not destroy. At least that's the intention. But the leap between a blinding light and a laser weapon isn't technological, it's political. Each prototype proves a paradox. The more capable your defenses, the more intimidating they appear. And intimidation in a place of silence and isolation equals provocation. Inside simulated lunar bases on Earth, astronauts practice emergency lockdowns. They train for impacts, radiation surges, communication blackouts. Yet what they fear most isn't environmental, it's human misjudgment drifting through the static. The future may never see a battle on the moon, but every precaution, every hardened wall, every drone on standby builds a mindset ready for one. Step by step, a language of defense becomes the foundation for doctrines of control. And somewhere deep beneath layers of regolith, surrounded by quiet sensors and humming reactors, humanity's first off-world soldiers may one day stand guard, not against aliens or asteroids, but against each other. Because once defense begins, offense isn't far behind. The weaponization of cislunar space. Far above the moon's dusty plains lies another theater, a vast invisible battleground stretching between Earth and its satellite. That region, called cislunar space, is bigger than most people realize. It's the volume where gravity from both worlds intertwines, where satellites drift through complex orbits, and where the foundations for all lunar logistics begin. To most, it's empty space. To strategists, it's the next front line. Think of it as cosmic real estate. Whoever dominates cislunar space controls the lanes between worlds, communication corridors, navigation beacons, and refueling trajectories. Once those were just calculations for scientists. Now they're strategic positions, and like every high ground in history, they're being quietly claimed long before anyone admits it. There are 5 gravitational sweet spots called Lagrange points where objects can remain stable with minimal fuel. Those 5 points form invisible gateways perfect for satellites, depots, or listening posts. During the Apollo era, they were theoretical curiosities. Today, they're contested opportunities. A relay satellite positioned at L1 or L2 can eavesdrop on both Earth and Moon. A surveillance platform at L4 or L5 can monitor half the solar neighborhood. No shots fired, just presence. In Washington, analysts refer to this domain as the ultimate high ground. Control here means early warnings, secure command links, and an unchallenged view of every launch leaving Earth. The U.S. Space Force has made it clear. Awareness in cislunar space equals deterrence. Its new command centers track thousands of objects beyond geosynchronous orbit, building the world's first cislunar operating picture. They call the system the Deep Space Advanced Radar Capability, designed not for astronomy but for geopolitics. Across the Pacific, China sees the same advantage. The Queqiao-2 relay network supporting the Chang missions already operates beyond the moon. Officially, it provides communications for lunar rovers. Unofficially, it performs orbital mapping, intelligence gathering, and deep tracking. Every test feeds data into China's growing space situational awareness framework, an AI-driven engine capable of predicting adversary movements long before they happen. These developments don't look militarized on paper. There are no lasers pointing at satellites, no declared weapons. Yet the line between civilian and military capability in space has nearly vanished. A navigation satellite equipped with a high-resolution camera can double as reconnaissance. A debris-clearing vehicle with robotic arms can just as easily disable another nation's spacecraft. Dual-use technology is the new euphemism for quiet armament. The idea of weaponizing cislunar space isn't new. Back in the 198s, the US debated Star Wars weapon systems to defend Earth from orbit. But those discussions never reached the moon's neighborhood. Now they have. As humanity stretches its supply lines outward, so do its anxieties. Bases, depots, and transit points all create assets worth protecting and therefore potential targets. Technologists talk about constellation resilience, the ability to reroute signals if one satellite fails. But resilience and militarization often travel hand in hand. To make a network resilient, you add redundancy, autonomy, and defensive protocols. In practice, that means satellites capable of maneuvering, counter-jamming, or self-destructing if captured. The same hardware that ensures safety can enable offense. AI ties it all together. Cislunar distances make human response times painfully slow. Signals can take seconds to round trip between Earth and Moon. That lag means decisions must be automated. The new generation of satellites carries onboard intelligence, small but capable neural networks trained to recognize threats and act without waiting for permission. It's intended to prevent accidents. Ironically, it's what might trigger them first. Imagine two rival satellites approaching the same orbit, each running autonomous avoidance software. One misinterprets a maneuver as aggression. Its system reacts defensively, shifting trajectory or deploying a countermeasure. Suddenly, in the span of milliseconds, two machines hundreds of thousands of kilometers away are entangled in a standoff no human can stop in time. That's not science fiction, it's the nightmare scenario every strategist fears. To counter that risk, nations build tripwire doctrines, rules of engagement for artificial agents. But the doctrine depends on trust, and trust is vanishing fast. After a series of unexplained signal interferences in the late 200s, Chinese and American analysts accused each other of electronic interference testing. No confirmed proof ever surfaced. Still, both sides hardened protocols, added encryption, and quietly shifted more satellites into cislunar transit. Those satellites increasingly are not pure science missions. Many carry optical sensors, synthetic aperture radars, and AI monitoring suites able to map storm patterns, mineral deposits, or spacecraft signatures depending on command input. Put simply, they can spy as easily as they can study. Nobody calls them weapons, but everyone prepares for the day someone does. Behind closed doors, planners discuss persistent cislunar presence, an elegant phrase for surveillance coverage that never blinks. The US invests in hybrid propulsion craft that can reposition quickly between Lagrange points, shadowing foreign satellites. China experiments with solar sail drones capable of weeks-long observation runs. Russia, though economically constrained, contributes legacy expertise in electronic warfare, designs for jammers and decoys adapted for higher orbits. Every piece adds up to a quiet, expanding defense perimeter around the Earth-Moon system. The rationale sounds pragmatic: protect navigational integrity, prevent debris collisions, secure future crewed missions. But beneath that language sits the unspoken logic of deterrence. If you can monitor your rival's spacecraft from cislunar space, you can preempt unpredictability. You can threaten without firing, simply by existing in the right orbit at the right time. The problem is, deterrence by presence looks identical to preparation for conflict. To outsiders, there's no way to tell a shield from a spear. The transparency promised by early space treaties is suffocating under layers of classified data and proprietary encryption. Today, fewer than a dozen organizations can accurately track everything beyond geosynchronous orbit, and most of them are military. Space lawyers describe this as the verification gap. The Outer Space Treaty bans weapons of mass destruction in orbit, but says nothing about localized defense systems or kinetic interceptors parked halfway to the Moon. A metal rod accelerated at orbital velocity could devastate a satellite without explosive payloads, technically unregulated, fundamentally devastating. Those are the gray areas where modern policy quietly operates. Meanwhile, engineers pursue efficiency in the guise of security. Microsat swarms, each the size of a backpack, can be deployed to form adaptive sensor nets. They map gravitational drifts, but they also serve as early warning webs. Autonomous formation flight sounds peaceful until you realize the same code allows rapid assembly into potential attack configurations. One cluster can jam communications, another can shadow an adversary's satellite until it's forced to move. All automatic, all explainable as navigation experiments. There's also the question of command hierarchy. In deep space, communication lag means local nodes must make independent decisions. The moment an AI decides defensive posture without oversight, accountability disappears. If an automated satellite disables another, who bears responsibility, the operator, the designer, or the code itself? No one has an answer. And answers matter when failure could mean orbital debris that endangers every mission in transit. The US Space Force, established barely a decade earlier, now frames itself as a guardian of freedom of action beyond Earth orbit. Its partnerships stretch across NASA, private companies, and allied defense ministries. The European Space Agency participates under security cooperation, hoping access ensures transparency. Yet participation itself legitimizes the militarization process. Once you join surveillance networks, you rely on them. And reliance breeds weaponization, not restraint. China's military planners mirror those steps. The People's Liberation Army Strategic Support Force oversees space operations, blending civilian and defense technology development. Their doctrine speaks of information dominance, real-time awareness across all domains including Cislunar. The more sensors they deploy, the more they can ensure strategic stability. It's almost poetic how both sides claim to prevent war by making it runnable. As for Russia, constrained but cunning, its contribution lies in unpredictability. It tests small satellites capable of indefinite dormancy, cold, unpowered shells drifting silently until awakened by coded triggers. To outsiders, they're debris. In a crisis, they could become hunters. It's cheap deterrence through ambiguity, and it works. Meanwhile, private companies again blur boundaries. Starlink's growing network extends signal coverage farther than ever, potentially useful for both communication and targeting. Blue Origin and Northrop designed transfer stations near Lagrange points that double as refueling depots. Officially for exploration, unofficially they offer the capability to maintain military assets indefinitely. So by the mid-203s, a silent grid emerges, hundreds of satellites tracing invisible paths through cislunar space, each a potential node in an unacknowledged arms race. No treaties broken, no launches labeled weapon. Yet the architecture of conflict slowly crystallizes orbit by orbit. Every era has its strategic frontier, the ocean, the sky, the atom. Now it's gravity's in between, where machines drift like ghosts and no human eye can see the rules being rewritten. The danger isn't that someone will declare war in cislunar space. It's that one accident, one algorithm misread, could start it without anyone intending to. That's the paradox shaping our species' newest realm. The more we seek to secure the void, the more hostile it becomes. Somewhere between Earth and Moon, hidden among the stars, humanity is already building the scaffolding of its next battlefield. The legal vacuum above Earth's. High above the Earth's borders, where gravity loosens its grip and politics grows faint, law begins to dissolve. On paper, humanity already wrote its code for space, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 still revered as the foundation of cosmic diplomacy. It was a masterpiece of hope drafted in the shadow of the Cold War, declaring that outer space, including the Moon, belongs to all humankind. No weapons of mass destruction, no national ownership, no wars in orbit. It worked as long as space was unreachable, now not so much. Back then, no one imagined private rockets landing bulldozers on the Moon. They didn't picture AI-guided satellites maneuvering around critical communication relays or nations quietly carving out safety zones. The treaty never foresaw billion-dollar companies acting as interplanetary landlords or governments outsourcing exploration to the highest bidder. It assumed the cosmos would be a shared sanctuary, not a marketplace fringed by surveillance constellations. So as technology races forward, the law stands still. The result, a vacuum in more ways than one. Every year, new missions crowd lunar orbit, and every operator, governmental or private, interprets the rules differently. The United States leans on the Artemis Accords, modern extensions of the old treaty that outline transparency and cooperation. They sound noble: data sharing, environmental protection, mutual help in distress. But critics call them selective architecture, rules written by those already leading the race. Because according to the Accords, partners designate safety zones around sites to prevent interference. Outside that zone, freedom persists. Inside it, access requires consent. But what's a safety zone if not a quiet territory line? China and Russia saw that clause as de facto ownership wrapped in careful diplomacy. In response, they proposed their own cooperative framework, centered on the International Lunar Research Station, arguing for multilateral oversight instead of American leadership. Yet their plan too consolidates control under national authority. Different banners, same instinct to shape the rules before someone else does. The tension isn't that the treaties prohibit action, it's that they don't clarify it. The Outer Space Treaty bans sovereignty but says nothing about resource extraction, so mining lunar ice or refining metals remains technically legal. Companies claim, nations license, and lawyers scramble to justify ownership through use rights. They argue that extracting materials doesn't constitute appropriation, it's simply utilization. In international law, that loophole is massive enough to land a rocket through. Add to that the Moon Agreement of 1979 meant to close those gaps, declaring resources the common heritage of mankind. Hardly anyone signed it, neither the US nor Russia nor China, precisely because it asked for shared governance and resource redistribution. In practice, the dominant players prefer ambiguity. Ambiguity rewards whoever moves first. This evolving patchwork creates moral theater disguised as cooperation. Each bloc frames its version of the law as inclusive while quietly engineering self-benefit. The Artemis Coalition preaches transparency, but reserves the right to authorize private licenses under US jurisdiction. The Eurasian Alliance warns of militarization even as it invests in dual-use infrastructure around the poles. The European Space Agency floats proposals for neutral data exchanges. though those systems depend on American communication networks. Everyone quotes the same treaties, everyone reads different meanings. Look at space traffic management or the lack of it. Earth's low orbit already struggles with collision risk, but cislunar space, thousands of times larger, has no agreed protocol for who tracks what. The US operates advanced radar networks, China builds its own telescopic arrays, private firms like Leo Labs sell tracking data as a service. Each source is proprietary. No central authority verifies accuracy. If a spacecraft's path threatens another, there's no legal obligation to alter course, only diplomatic pressure. Sooner or later, a crash will transform legal theory into chaos. Then there's the question of liability. Under the old liability convention, states bear responsibility for damage caused by their launches, even if a private company operates the mission. But what counts as damage on the moon? A rover crossing into a competitor's excavation zone, a signal beam disrupting another's communications. These are no longer fantasies, they're plausible scenarios waiting for a court that doesn't exist. The International Court of Justice, bound by Earth-centric law, lacks mandate over extraterrestrial property disputes. So if a company alleges sabotage 380,000 kilometers away, where do they even file a claim? Space lawyers privately call it jurisdictional vertigo. Every actor insists the law still applies, yet none can explain who enforces it. Enforcement, after all, requires presence, and presence starts to look like occupation, the very thing treaties forbid. History repeats hidden lessons. Maritime law once faced the same dilemma when nations contested trade routes and underwater resources. The sea too was declared free and beyond ownership until technology made it profitable. Then came creeping jurisdiction, exclusive economic zones, continental shelves, private licenses. The moon is drifting down that same path, except this time there's no ocean to sail, only gravity wells and silence. Diplomats try to keep up. The United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space meets annually in Vienna, releasing reports that read like cautious poetry. The peaceful exploration of outer space must remain the province of all humankind. But politeness can't stop propulsion. Each policy session arrives after the rockets have already flown. By the time consensus forms, reality outpaces regulation again. Meanwhile, national legislatures improvise. The United States passed its Space Resource Exploration and Utilization Act, granting U.S. citizens rights to own materials they extract in space. Luxembourg, the UAE, and Japan copied that approach. China followed with internal directives granting state-owned corporations long-term operational stewardship. Translated, that means control. These domestic laws quietly rewrite global norms by precedent. Every new launch authorized under them normalizes ownership that international treaties never ratified. Critics warn of precedent. If the moon's resources become extensions of national economies, conflict becomes inevitable. Imagine rival excavation zones separated by invisible borders, each guarded by automated systems built to secure investment. What begins as mining ends as militarization, the natural outcome of property without neutral law. Cislunar lawyers dream of a new space commons charter, binding, modern, enforceable. But enforcement implies authority, authority implies hierarchy, and hierarchy shatters the illusion of cosmic equality. The very principles that made the 1967 treaty inspiring, no borders, no domination, now make governance impossible. You can't police a frontier if no one owns the badge. So actors fill the void. Intelligence agencies negotiate private data exchanges under security umbrellas. Corporations design self-governing protocols, arbitration clauses embedded in contracts, backed by insurance giants hedging risk at lunar scales. It sounds bureaucratic, but it's the birth of parallel sovereignty, law by contract, enforced by capital rather than court. The first clauses about exclusive operating zones already echo colonial charters of past centuries, only now written in code instead of parchment. Publicly, agencies deny any drift toward weaponization. Their press releases celebrate safe, sustainable operations. Yet every policy paper includes one identical justification: protection. Protection of assets, crews, intellectual property, and once you protect, you implicitly claim. That's how territory is born, not by flag planting but by maintenance. When one nation repairs a navigation beacon, it owns its coordinates in practice. When another installs relays nearby, it asserts overlapping jurisdiction. Step by step, law morphs into geography, geography into politics, and above Earth, invisible lines begin to solidify. Within a decade, legal scholars warn the first major dispute is unavoidable. Maybe a mining rig damages a rival sensor array. Maybe a probe crosses into a restricted safety zone. Maybe a corporate AI disables access to prevent resource contamination. Whatever the trigger, the question will echo through every control room: who decides what's lawful out there? So far, there's no answer. The courts are silent, the treaties obsolete, the ambitions endless. Outer space remains officially the province of all humankind, yet all humankind now competes to own it. That's the irony hanging between stars and statutes. We wrote the rules when the frontier was empty. Now that it's filling up, we're discovering they were never meant to hold. And until someone or something builds law fast enough to match propulsion, the next world humanity inhabits will be guided not by ideals but by momentum. Because in the vacuum above Earth, power already acts as judge, and the verdict for now belongs to whoever gets there first. The Shadow Cold War. It starts quietly, minor anomalies buried in telemetry reports, strange pings on radar screens, data packets that don't trace back to any registered satellite. Engineers dismiss them as cosmic noise, but analysts know better. Somewhere out there in the black between Earth and Moon, the first moves of a new confrontation unfold, one without declarations or battle lines. The headlines still talk about cooperation, but behind encrypted channels, everyone's playing spy again. This era doesn't look like the Cold War our grandparents remembered. There are no walls, no mushroom clouds, no televised threats. Just silence, algorithms, and machines drifting through vacuum. Yet the logic is identical: mutual fear, relentless surveillance, and the constant illusion of peace maintained by preparation for conflict. Inside an unmarked control room at Vandenberg Space Force Base, analysts track a Chinese satellite tailing an American relay vehicle near lunar orbit. Its course isn't aggressive, just persistent. Too close for science, too perfect for coincidence. Across the world, in China's Shandong Tracking Center, operators run simulations on that same encounter. They log it as routine observation. Both sides record every movement, every pixel of telemetry, building dossiers on each other's capabilities. It's espionage by orbit. From Washington to Beijing, officials publicly praise transparency. Privately, they issue alerts called proximity advisories, formal notices that sound polite but bristle with accusation. Unintentional approach within operational tolerance. Translation: stay out of our lane. None of this makes news, it's buried in bureaucratic language until something goes wrong. By 2033, the incidents multiply. A US probe transmitting geological data experiences sudden interference. Its signal reappears hours later, slightly delayed, as if mirrored through a third-party relay. In Houston, engineers suspect hacking. In Beijing, spokespeople deny everything. Moscow shrugs, blaming solar storms. Investigations stall in the vacuum of mutual distrust. These are shadow operations, calculated tests of defenses where deniability is the real weapon. A satellite nudges too near, a transmission mysteriously echoes, a communication grid stutters for 5 minutes. Each side pretends not to notice while recording everything for the next confrontation. Through constant provocation and careful restraint, a balance emerges, the unstable calm of deterrence. Cyber warfare becomes the easiest battlefield to hide in. No missiles, no debris, just corrupted lines of code flung across space-ground networks. Hackers breach relay antennas, replace firmware, plant deep backdoors. The difference between espionage and sabotage narrows to a few keystrokes. The AI guardians meant to protect satellites from intrusion start generating false positives. One glitchy update locks out operators for hours, triggering panic inside a lunar communication hub. Nobody confirms who initiated it. Everyone upgrades their defenses the next day. Cislunar communications are especially vulnerable because every command, every image, every heartbeat of a rover passes through Earth-based networks. Compromise a single ground station and an entire mission could be redirected. During a joint operation in 2034, telemetry from an international probe briefly rerouted through an unidentified server farm in Eastern Europe. When officials traced the signature, it resembled Russian code fragments from older defense software. Moscow called that technical coincidence. No one believed it. Even allies begin turning cautious. European data centers handling Artemis traffic bake new encryption layers between American and local nodes. Japan demands physical separation of military and civilian communication lines after unexplained packet duplication in cislunar channels. Trust fractures into guarded alliances, each partner convinced the other is leaking secrets. The arms race of invisibility accelerates. Satellite firms invent quantum encrypted relays boasting uncrackable links. China unveils entanglement-based communication connecting Earth and lunar orbit in real time. Days later, the US funds a mirror project through private contractors disguised as scientific programs. Behind the rhetoric of innovation lies a single motive: control information faster than anyone else. And when data hardens into strategy, perception follows. Every test, every launch becomes a message. The US activates the Cislunar Highway Patrol System, a chain of orbital sensors mapping all objects beyond geosynchronous orbit. Official mission: debris monitoring. Unofficial purpose: continuous surveillance of every lunar trajectory. Beijing responds with the Tianzuo network, a fleet of small satellites sweeping high orbits above the Earth-Moon L2 point. The circuits overlap perfectly, like two invisible fortresses staring each other down. To the public, these expansions look like progress in space traffic management. In reality, they are radar screens for an undeclared front. The first Cold War guarded borders, the second guards mathematics, latency, frequencies, signal distortion. Whoever controls the data flows controls the narrative of events. Inside the Pentagon, a new doctrine takes shape: strategic stability through space denial. The idea is simple: ensure no rival can operate unobserved. Surveillance equals safety. China's strategic support force mirrors that reasoning almost word for word. Two languages, one philosophy, keep eyes everywhere. The result? Paranoia baked into policy. Artificial intelligence magnifies it further. Algorithms parse every orbital pattern for signs of deviation, tagging anomalies with probability ratings. Potential unregistered maneuver, 0.42 threat likelihood. Those numbers fuel response drills. Controllers act before verifying and occasionally before understanding. One automated American satellite once repositioned itself to avoid an approaching Chinese probe. The movement looked hostile and triggered a reciprocal maneuver. For 12 tense minutes, two machines orbited like duelists waiting for a signal neither could hear. Humans intervened barely in time. Both nations quietly adjusted fail-safes and built smarter, faster replacements. Cultural memories from the 20th century resurface. Newscasts run montages comparing satellites to submarines, data leaks to espionage cables. Politicians resurrect the word containment. University students study lunar geography the way their parents memorized nuclear blast radius maps. Old fears dressed up as new vocabulary. The most dangerous element isn't weaponry, it's miscommunication. In 2035, an American relay above the lunar far side sent out an unscheduled beacon ping. Minutes later, Chinese receivers interpreted it as radar targeting. Commanders on both sides declared system alerts. 2 hours later, technicians found the cause. An onboard AI updating firmware had rebooted autonomously. The incident stayed classified, described internally as a data synchronization anomaly. But insiders whispered it nearly escalated into humanity's first orbital standoff. That's the terror of machine speed in human politics. Decisions once deliberated over hours now unfold in milliseconds, and algorithms don't understand diplomacy. Each upgrade designed to protect stability inches the system closer to instability itself. Russia thrives in those cracks. Lacking the resources for a technological race, it exploits ambiguity. Its small satellites drift unpredictably, turning transparency into confusion. Western analysts track one object thought to be derelict until it suddenly changes trajectory, shadowing an American spy satellite for days. The maneuver sends shockwaves through intelligence circles. Russia denies control, calling it unintended reactivation. The message lands anyway: unpredictability is power. Meanwhile, corporate entities enter the chill. SpaceX's ever-expanding Starlink constellation extends beyond low Earth orbit, theoretically civilian but functionally dual use. Its data backbones carry military communications. Its surveillance potential dwarfs most national arrays. China interprets every orbital cluster as tactical infrastructure. The company becomes both innovator and geopolitical signal, proof that private assets can act as state leverage. Beijing counters with state-backed tech firms deploying their own micro-satellite networks. The result looks cooperative on paper, public-private partnership, but masks heavy military coordination. Western analysts call it mirror deterrence. So history loops again, each block reflecting the other's paranoia until symmetry itself becomes a threat. In this environment, diplomacy changes form. No one wants open confrontation, there's too much at stake economically, but no one can afford transparency either. Instead, nations build protocols of plausible cooperation, joint scientific committees, data sharing platforms edited beyond usefulness, ceremonial video calls between agency heads. Symbolic gestures performing calm while real tension hums one layer below. A few diplomats try to reinstate confidence-building measures, mutual notification of launches, shared telemetry, but they collide with classification walls. Military satellites masquerade as weather instruments, resource prospectors double as reconnaissance probes. Every disclosure risks revealing capability. Silence becomes policy. By the mid-203s, the pattern is unmistakable. Every superpower behaves like it did during the nuclear standoff: constant readiness, constant denial. Only the arsenal has changed, from missiles to algorithms, from silos to satellites. The moon, still unscarred, now orbits under an invisible curtain of suspicion stretching all the way to cislunar space. The doctrine of mutual assured detection replaces mutually assured destruction. Instead of threatening annihilation, nations threaten revelation. We can see you wherever you are. It sounds safer, yet it breeds the same paranoia. To maintain visibility, you must always watch, always intrude, always test boundaries. Peace through omniscience enforced by machines. Inside those silent systems, the seeds of escalation already grow. A single software glitch, a misinterpreted ping, or a defensive auto-response could ignite retaliation faster than any diplomat could react. Humanity has rebuilt deterrence on autopilot, trading mushroom clouds for machine logic. There's a grim elegance to it, a ballet of trust and deceit moving through darkness. But it leaves one haunting truth. We might already be inside the next Cold War, drifting hundreds of thousands of kilometers above the world that still believes it ended. The first Flashpoint. It begins with silence, the kind that feels deceptive. For weeks, instruments show nothing unusual across the lunar South Pole. Artemis crews continue drilling test cores, Chinese rovers hum through the Shackleton crater rim, and mission control analysts back on Earth watch the slow ballet of coordination unfold in spreadsheets and telemetry graphs. Then, without warning, a radar echo appears, brief, sharp, unfamiliar. A new transmission frequency, unregistered, close to an existing mining zone. Within hours, suspicion outpaces verification. The official reports will later call it an anomaly in surface activity. Unofficially, it's the moment the first territorial dispute beyond Earth begins. At the heart of it all lies a narrow belt of terrain, an ice-bearing ridge between two shadowed valleys. Both the Artemis Consortium and China's ILRS alliance have survey rights there under overlapping safety zones submitted to the UN registry. The edges blur in translation. One side's operations buffer becomes another's exclusive research area. Coordinates marked in degrees and minutes don't account for shifting shadows or rough terrain. On the ground, it's dust and rock. In policy language, it's sovereignty by centimeters. One morning, a Chinese rover, autonomous, solar-powered, rolls beyond its beacon grid following a sample path programmed weeks earlier. It crosses an invisible boundary no one can see. A US sensor post buried under 2 meters of regolith flags movement. Automatic cameras activate. The AI system classifies the object as unauthorized mechanical intrusion. A message dispatches to Earth where human controllers review the feed, 50 seconds delayed by transmission lag. From Houston to Beijing, 2 interpretations crystallize in the time it takes light to cross space. In China's control center, operators see the rover completing a planned mission. In the US, analysts read a bold incursion into restricted territory. The algorithms attached to each network don't wait for debate, they begin defensive subroutines. Power levels adjust, antennas shift posture, subsurface nodes heat up to mask signature readings. Both sides interpret these fluctuations as potential electronic warfare. Within minutes, diplomatic channels ignite. NASA and CNSA liaison officers open encrypted comms, reading from scripts polished by lawyers. We request operational clarification on observed surface activity within Artemis-designated Zone 12. Beijing replies with equal formality, citing adherence to all international agreements. The longer the words last, the shorter tempers run. Then the feed glitches. The sensor station transmitting visual confirmation cuts out mid-signal. Beijing accuses interference. Washington blames a power fault. Neither side trusts either explanation. Mission updates halt. On the lunar surface, the rover continues crawling forward, unaware that its position has become a trigger. Back on Earth, news leaks. Anonymous insiders mention unauthorized entry near US installations. Social media erupts, amplifying rumors faster than mission control can draft a statement. Has contact been lost? Did a Chinese rover attack an American base? The headlines spiral, speculation turns the story viral before facts arrive. Inside the Pentagon, a satellite early warning unit repositions a relay network for signal stability. In Beijing, the Strategic Support Force shifts an observation satellite closer to the South Pole corridor, purely to confirm telemetry. Both maneuvers coincide perfectly in orbit, creating overlapping radar cones. To outside sensors, it looks like mobilization. What nobody notices at first is the timing, a cosmic misunderstanding accelerated by automation. The lost signal isn't sabotage, it's the result of lunar night approaching faster than forecast. A local dust storm scatters static through the communication band. The rover's solar panels begin shutting down sequence, inadvertently broadcasting error codes resembling radar bursts. That ghost data triggers further misreadings in American software. Machines talk across 500,000 kilometers, and every word sounds like aggression. The White House holds back statements waiting for clarity. Chinese officials demand a UN special session. The world's newsrooms treat the event as the first extraterrestrial standoff. Unverified reports of skirmish conditions flash across ticker screens. Markets quiver, defense stocks rise. Somewhere in orbit, commercial communications satellites reroute frequencies to avoid possible interference. On the moon, the machines keep working. The rover, drained of energy, freezes mid-path. An Artemis drone, instructed to resume surveillance as soon as link integrity restores, launches autonomously from a nearby base. On approach, its sensors detect unfamiliar metal signatures, remnants of the rover, interprets them as potential hazard. and initiates a containment protocol, deploy reflective flare to deter debris collision. The flare ignites, its reflection flaring out across the crater. 30 seconds later, Chinese operators monitoring from Kwekyo 2 registers the sudden burst of light. Their system flags it as directed energy emission. Automated response, reposition communication dish to shield mode, cut data transmission to protect instruments. From Earth's vantage, that readout mimics an electronic defense posture. Escalation on autopilots. By the time humans intervene, the loop has spun too far for easy exit. The Artemis drone powers down under manual override, but in fuel exhaustion it crashes softly onto the crater rim. Sensors in Beijing log the impact energy as collision. CNN calls it contact. The People's Daily frames it as foreign hardware intrusion. Overnight, the world rediscovers how fragile peace looks under 1 second delay. At the United Nations, emergency meetings stretch into dawn. Analysts replay signal data frame by frame, arguing about intent while 8-hour gaps in transmission delay context. No evidence of hostile action emerges, yet no side admits fault either. The rhetoric hardens: unacceptable provocation, territorial integrity of designated zones, defensive autonomy. The language of diplomacy begins mutating into defense posture. Publicly, leaders urge calm. Behind the curtain, militaries prepare contingencies for extended communication disruption. That phrase covers everything from cyber defense to orbital repositioning. In simulation centers from Huntsville to Harbin, analysts run wargames titled Lunar Deconfliction Scenario 1A. Each ends the same way: stalemate by exhaustion, trust shattered. Amid the noise, engineers finally recover the memory from the collapsed drone. The onboard footage reveals the truth. The Chinese rover was unarmed, operating exactly within mission plan. The safety zone boundaries had been miscalculated by less than 50 meters due to outdated terrain mapping. Every reaction afterward was human projection amplified by machine precision. But by then, perception outweighs evidence. The story has hardened into history, the first lunar incident. Every government cites it as justification for tighter rules of engagement, improved defensive autonomy, and expanded situational awareness networks. Regulators call for independent verification habitats. Defense contractors call it opportunity. In corporate boardrooms, executives use the event to pitch new monitoring solutions. AI guardians for secure coexistence. Space insurers raise premiums by 60%. Lawmakers propose the Lunar Safety and Accountability Act, codifying who can respond to mechanical intrusion. In practice, it gives Earthside military agencies veto control over off-world missions. In effect, the first Flashpoint rewires policy on both sides of the planet. Even months later, long after analysts confirm no deliberate aggression occurred, distrust persists like radiation. American astronauts cancel joint communication calibration tests. Chinese planners start equipping every subsequent rover with advanced encryption and self-defense scripts that disable sensors if scanned by unknown frequencies. Each precaution deepens the divide it's meant to prevent. Psychologically, the damage is deeper. Humanity learns that even without weapons, conflict can emerge from shadow and signal. You don't need bullets where misunderstanding travels at light speed. The event becomes a parable taught in academies: how communication lag and political pride can transform data into danger. Documentaries dramatize it, families debate it, editors nickname it the 40-second war. No casualties, no craters, yet policy changes ripple down to Earth like gravitational tides. NASA and CNSA resume dialogues, but through thicker filters. Every shared database now runs on air-gapped servers. Cooperation survives in ceremony, suspicion rules everything else. For future missions, protocols multiply. No rover moves without dual sign-off verification. No AI activates defense subroutines without human confirmation windows. The systems slow down, not because technology can't go faster, but because politics can't keep up. Progress becomes deliberate hesitation. And somewhere buried under layers of dust in the Shackleton Basin, two machines, the frozen Chinese rover and the shattered Artemis drone, lie less than 100 meters apart. No flags, no fences, just artifacts of caution turned catastrophe. When future explorers find them, they might misinterpret the scene, the first battlefield monument on another world. But those who lived it know the truth: there was no war, only fear. Fear made efficient by automation, diplomacy slowed by distance. Still, the lesson fades quickly into routine. By the next decade, missions resume, more guarded, more self-contained, yet closer to the edge. The world convinces itself it learned restraint. The moon keeps orbiting, indifferent as ever. But somewhere inside the coded logic of new generations of defense software, the ghosts of that misread signal remain, variables calibrated tighter, triggers tuned quicker. The first Flashpoint ends without destruction, but it leaves behind something more enduring: precedent. Every rover, every base, every satellite launched afterward carries in its firmware the memory of that day, a reminder that misunderstanding alone can weaponize the void. And down on Earth, amidst press conferences and patriotic soundbites, no one admits the obvious truth. In the race to claim peace through control, humanity just proved how fast peace can become the first casualty. What's really at stake? Stand back from the timelines, the treaties, the tech, and the headlines, strip it all down, and the question left hanging in the black above us is painfully simple. What are we actually fighting for? Because under every press release about exploration and peaceful development, the motives beating beneath are older than rocket fuel: security, prestige, survival, and fear. Humanity's first permanent colony beyond Earth might become our brightest achievement, or our most remote reminder that we never stopped competing to exist. Every generation rewrites the story of conquest. Once it was the ocean, then the air, then the atom. Each new frontier promised transformation, yet everyone turned into another mirror reflecting our instincts. The lunar race only magnifies them. For all the talk of science and advancement, what's really driving this surge of rockets and declarations is something deeper: anxiety. Who sets the rules for the next century of civilization? Who decides whose map draws the future? The moon has no borders, no politics, no sound. Yet somehow it's pulling every unresolved tension from Earth upward, manufacturing a silent replay of old rivalries under new light. America sees leadership as destiny, order through initiative. China sees it as restoration, order through balance. Russia views it as endurance, survival through relevance. And the private empires growing between them believe it's about freedom, the right to build without permission. The irony is that every definition of progress now includes an element of control. Control sits at the core of it all. Control of the lanes between Earth and the moon. Control of resource lines that might one day fuel Mars missions. Control of the data streaming from telescopes that shape not just science but surveillance. Each actor justifies it as defense, research, or commercial assurance. But none of those terms erase what they collectively mean. Whoever controls the sky gains leverage over the ground. This new scramble doesn't look territorial in the old sense. There are no fences up there, only frequencies, safety zones, and orbital slots. It's power without geography, a hierarchy built from bandwidth and presence. And that kind of power bleeds downward. The nation that dominates Cislunar infrastructure will shape global communications, navigation, and energy systems for decades. That's not science fiction, it's logistics in the making. Every rocket launch doubles as foreign policy. Ask the strategists what happens next, and they speak carefully, like historians afraid of prediction. Their models show that once one side establishes reliable refueling stations on the lunar surface, it gains cheaper access not just to space, but to markets back on Earth tied to space-based services, satellites, minerals, data networks. The change isn't symbolic. It's economic gravity slowly inverting, wealth orbiting where pressure and atmosphere don't reach. Those who can't follow get left looking up. That's the unspoken fear. The moon could break humanity's hierarchy just as space technology once rearranged it. A country that masters off-world industry doesn't just win bragging rights, it redefines dependence. Earthbound nations may find themselves reliant on lunar infrastructure for communications or launch support. The balance of power shifts skyward, intangible but absolute. That realization keeps every government chasing parity, pretending cooperation, preparing resilience. Still beneath policy, there's something elemental, a choice of identity. Do we see space as an extension of Earth's conflicts or an escape from them? The honest answer so far is both. We dream of larger perspectives but act with smaller intentions. Each rover planted on lunar soil carries the emblem of a nation, the stamp of ownership disguised as exploration. We speak of humanity's future, but build it under banners, grants, and defense contracts. The question haunting the corridors of every mission control room isn't technical anymore. It's moral. Can exploration survive ambition? Because every generation that built tools powerful enough to connect worlds also found ways to divide itself with them. Now the tools reach farther than ever and the stakes multiply accordingly. A misjudged policy doesn't just risk war, it risks dismantling the fragile trust that makes civilization unified enough to reach elsewhere at all. Philosophers call this the frontier paradox. Expansion exposes character. The farther humanity moves from home, the more its motives show. On the moon, there's no terrain to soften consequence, no wind, no ocean, no second chances. Intent arrives in pure form. If we go there seeking profit and dominance, that's exactly what we'll build. If we go seeking cooperation, maybe we'll finally grow into it. Look closer though, and there are faint reasons for hope. The same logistics webs that could be militarized also connect scientists who have never met except through encrypted channels. The same AI systems trained for defense are finding ways to optimize shared navigation grids, preventing accidents that could destroy both sides' equipment. Even paranoia breeds innovation that paradoxically keeps missions alive. Maybe survival will force collaboration where diplomacy failed. Optimism has limits. Every historical turning point disguised as progress carried its own quiet price. Nuclear energy lit cities before it leveled them. Digital networks united humanity before fracturing truth itself. Space will follow the same pattern, promise first, reckoning later. The difference is scale. A crisis 400,000 kilometers away won't end in a city or continent. It will rewrite how the species thinks about sovereignty, trust, and control of existence itself. That's what's really at stake, not just real estate or minerals or strategic advantage, but identity. The decision of who we choose to become when the distance between nations suddenly includes the emptiness of space. Will that emptiness humble us, or will it simply give us more room to fight? For the first time, the frontier isn't about surviving nature, it's about surviving ourselves. The moon carries no weather, no politics, no grudges. We bring all of that with us. Above its silent horizons, every satellite drift and coded transmission whispers the same question humanity has never answered on Earth. Does progress inevitably require conflict, or can knowledge finally outrun fear? No one knows. Maybe in a century, lunar bases will stand as monuments to unity. Or maybe they'll be relics of another rivalry, long abandoned and quietly rusting in dust. Either way, history will see this moment as the test that defined what civilization meant when it left its birthplace. We came all this way chasing discovery, telling ourselves we were exploring the unknown. But the real unknown was never the moon, it was us. And if all of this spiraling technology and diplomacy leads to confrontation, the tragedy won't be that humanity conquered space. It'll be that we carried our oldest wars with us. Because the first battlefield beyond Earth will decide far more than who controls a crater or a mining rig. It'll decide whether humanity survives its own reflection once it sees it spread across the stars. The edge of forever. Humanity now stands between two choices: discovery or domination. The moon hangs above us like a mirror, reflecting both futures at once. Every rocket launch, every treaty signed brings us closer to knowing which reflection we'll choose. The line separating science from strategy keeps thinning until the objectives sound the same: stability, access, control. Maybe progress has always demanded risk, but this time the cost will echo across generations. For the first time, we're not only shaping life on another world, we're deciding what kind of species leaves its home behind. The question that began with a single footprint now extends through encrypted satellites and automated defenses, asking who we truly are when no one else is watching. The moon's silence won't guide us. It will only reflect what we send there: our fear, our hope, our hunger. The real battle isn't for territory. It's for restraint, perspective, and the chance to build something greater than rivalry. And if space law once promised equality, the question now lingers like static across every signal. If we can't govern a shared ocean on Earth, how will we govern a battlefield that stretches 240,000 miles across the void? The next great frontier might not unite us, it might divide the stars. If you want to uncover the hidden struggles shaping our cosmic future, watch the next story. Subscribe and see what humanity risks becoming when ambition finally outruns gravity.